Well, welcome to our eighth and final session in this class that traces an overview of the Old Testament from Genesis to the book of Esther. It's really been a privilege to spend time with each of you and to expose you to these beautiful books in perhaps new ways than what you've experienced in the past. I'm
Uh-oh, we lost him. Are you there? Can you hear me?
I can hear and see you, Paul, but I lost
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Dr. Sigler.
Yeah, we lost him.
Hopefully he knows that. Oh, looks
Oh,
like he's
here.
coming back.
I'm so sorry. Let's see if we're. Hey, we are recording, I think. All right. Sorry about that glitch. I started to say I'm so thankful for the many resources we have with the things that both Dr. Gromacki and others have shared by way of resources, and then the fact that I can electronically guide you through the Instructure portal with Canvas, and that's what I'll seek to lead us to now. I think of all of these resources. Are you able to see that screen for Instructure now?
No, we see the video of the three of us.
Okay, I'm going to share a screen then again. And here we go. How about that?
Yes.
Yes.
So, looking through all of these weeks, we've really covered a lot of ground, and we now come to week 8, looking at the books of Ezra, Esther, and Nehemiah. So I want to start right away with this handout on Ezra. And as you would have that available, I also want to turn our attention to this chart on the Bible in the ancient Near East that you don't have to pull up, but I know you have it from earlier in the course. And essentially, it's looking at the timeline. And as we would consider things east of the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia, and west, southwest of the Fertile Crescent, Egypt, Israel truly is, as it has been, the land between. That was the title of a book by James Monson, a book that was really a Bible marking, a map marking manual with Bible passages that would spell out key events of geographical significance. And it would be paired with this map manual with beautiful, accurate topographical maps of Israel and the surrounding areas. And when we think about the location of Israel, it truly was the land between Mesopotamia and Egypt. They're the land bridge between the continents. And so I think it's appropriate that Israel is in the center of this chart. And once again, you see the chart, right?
Yes.
Great. So as we would, and we have looked in the past at the different eras of biblical history, the eras of the patriarchs of Egyptian bondage, Moses leading the children of Israel out of Egypt in the Exodus. Under Joshua, you have the conquest, and during the book of Judges, the settlement period, you have the united and divided monarchies, the fall of Jerusalem. The fall of Samaria in 722, the fall of Jerusalem in 586, that led to the Babylonian exile. And now, take a look with the return to Judah. This is the focus then of this time period of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. So as we think about the major players whose kingdoms were vast and powerful at this time, take a look on the chart a little higher and you consider in Mesopotamia what had been happening during the patriarchal period, yes, there were Akkadian texts, and but it's just a straight line. That's to indicate that there was a culture, but it wasn't a shape like a strong, powerful kingdom. With, notice this odd shape here, almost a diamond-like shape, with the rise of the Assyrian Empire and fall of the Assyrian Empire, the rise of Babylon and the fall of the Babylonian Empire, the rise of the Persian area, or Persian kingdom, empire, and then its fall to the Greeks, with the rise of the Seleucids in the north and the Ptolemies in the south. And you'll also note that there were different times of great power and ability in Egyptian kingdoms. So you have the rise of the old kingdom and then its decline, the rise of the middle kingdom and its decline, and eventually the new kingdom. And you notice that it wasn't a very powerful time for the Egyptians during the times of Ezra and Nehemiah, but the key power then, which is in the front page of our news today because of the bombing of Iran, the preemptive, if you will, attack against Iran by the US and Israel over the weekend. You have the Persian Empire. This is its early name, the Persian Empire. Also associated in the Bible with Elam, E-L-A-M. A certain region in what is today Iran. I think of Shushan, the palace, also known as Susa, where Queen Esther has her fame. But again, leading up to this, you have Ezra and Nehemiah, and we'll talk about them both. I'd just like to put it both in this historical and geographical context, where what was going on in Israel at the time. Well, you have the return to Judah at the end of the Babylonian exile, but you also have the fact that many Jewish people stayed. And just as was predicted, you might recall some of the names of Isaiah's sons, and Isaiah chapter 8 says that his sons were for signs in Israel. So he named his sons things like She'er Yashuv. She'er Yashuv means a remnant shall return. And Isaiah prophesied during the time of the divided monarchy, when only where you have Israel long before the Babylonian exile, but he prophesied of a time after the Babylonian exile when under Cyrus the Great, he would give a decree that the Jews could return and rebuild the temple. And it's here in this time of the reign of the Persian Empire that our books, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, are going to have their historical background. So, with that, let me go back to our week 8 handouts, and we'll look at Ezra. Now, can you see this document?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna expand the screen a little bit. Notice I share this unedited version from guess how long ago, from a
Yeah.
course I took on Old Testament seminar at Faith Baptist Theological Seminary. No. I took this during a degree I started but didn't finish because that pushed me to consider the PhD program at Trinity. This was a THM in Old Testament. After I had done my MA and MDiv, I started a THM at Grand Rapids Baptist Seminary. Now, associate with Cornerstone University in Grand Rapids, but I never finished the course, and it was because I thought, for this much work, I should just accept that the Lord might be leading us to do a doctoral program. And in prayer with my wife and meeting with the elders of our congregation, it just that's that. Well, the rest is history, we can say. But there it was back in the day, uh, book of Ezra. So, so a little bit of background here. In terms of authorship, we've looked at a handout like this that I've shared with you, updated versions of these on each of the books of the Pentateuch, the books of the Torah. But now we're at a whole different period of history and lots of different stages of critical attacks against the historical reliability of the Bible, not looking at the JEDP theory for the Pentateuch, but in somewhat that same critical mentality, not taking the Bible at face value. So we want to address those challenges, but also understand them properly and then respond from a faithful, high view of Scripture and its trustworthiness, authority, and inerrancy. So, authorship. It is thought that Ezra and Nehemiah were originally one book in the Hebrew canon. This is supported by Josephus, Jerome, and the Talmud. And you can see the specific citations in parentheses there, as well as the Septuagint, which causes confusion by naming it Esdras, Esdras, a name which refers to the canonical books mentioned here and also to the apocryphal book of First Esdras. So again, that's confusing, but we can put it like this. No matter how many books there are in the way you number them, almost like when you come to, in our English Bibles, First and Second Kings, well, that's all one book in Hebrew, or First and Second Samuel. They aren't two different books. They're Shmuel Aleph and Shmuel Bet. It's Samuel A and B. It's the same book. So no matter how many books you count up, the question is, what texts are included in the canon? And of course, when you come to the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, they were counted as one of the books of Esdras, Esdras. So the first person account recorded in Ezra, according to H.E. Ryle in Edwin Yamauchi's book about this subject, have never been disputed. So we're talking about these undisputed accounts. However, the third person accounts have caused some to conclude that a compiler edited Ezra's work. Okay, so this is the higher critical concern of some scholars. And then notice this rebuttal. But linguistic analysis has shown that both the first person and the third person extracts resemble each other. So writes Edwin Yamauchi. In fact, many conservative scholars hold that Ezra composed and compiled, due to the many official lists present, Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah. So when it comes to authorship, it looks like Ezra himself, notice what he's called, by the way, Ezra the scribe. He's known in Scripture already for writing things down. It's very possible that he composed and compiled Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah. Also notable is the observation that the writer had a great deal of interest in priestly duties and records, thus suggesting that he was a priest himself. That Ezra was the chronicler is supported by the common verses, words, themes, and theology of each of the books. C.C. Torrey suggests that there is not a garment in all Ezra's wardrobe that does not fit the chronicler exactly. I thought that's kind of a brilliant statement. So when it comes to the authorship of these books, the overwhelming conservative opinion is, hey, look, Ezra, he's a real person, just like Adam, Eve, Abraham. I mean, going back further, Noah. I mean, we're taking these people as real people. And of course, we have no doubt that Ezra is a real person. Nehemiah is a real person. And the fact that he is identified in the scriptural text as a scribe lets us know that he had real writing abilities. And it's not just believable, it's understandable that he very well would have composed the book that bears his name, as well as the Chronicles, these books of history, and the book of Nehemiah. Any questions about authorship then?
Makes sense.
And of course, your textbook will go further into this subject of authorship, but I thought it would be helpful for you to have these historical sources to know where to go in both Josephus and Jerome and the Talmud and the Septuagint if you'd like to go further on this. Personally, this has never been a great struggle for me, and I think the more that archaeology continues to just uncover reality after reality after reality, that even the most resistant people to the historicity of the biblical truth claims, one after another, their objections have to crumble in the face of the overwhelming, indisputable data from archaeology. So now we go to time, authorship, and now date, if you will. Critical scholars have advocated dates for Ezra's composition as late as 200 BC. Specifically, Mowinckel suggested this, a German theologian. Yamauchi notes that Torrey, who believed that the words for coins in Ezra 2:69, 8:27, and Nehemiah 7, verses 70 to 72, were references to the Greek drachma, dated, and then this dated the work of the chronicler to 250 BC. However, conservative scholars have held to a date of approximately 440 BC. William F. Albright, the famed archaeologist, has declared that the trend of recent study has been strongly in favor of raising the date of the compilation of the chronicler's work from the 3rd century, as supposed by nearly all competent scholars of the past generation, to the early 4th. With this goes a correspondingly higher respect for its historical value. So even among, we'll say, critical scholars, while they pushed the date later and later, again, the more the evidence can be examined, the more the date gets pushed back closer to the time that the biblical text assumes. So Yamauchi cites the following assessment of F.M. Cross. Other arguments can be put for dating Chronicles to approximately 400. No hint of the conquest of Alexander is to be found. Of course, Alexander the Great launches what will become the Greek Empire somewhere around 333 BC. And that's never mentioned in any of these chronicles, any of these historical books. So you would think if a whole new empire shift has happened, we would have heard about it. But as F.M. Cross notes, no hint of the conquest of Alexander is to be found, and perhaps more important, no reference to the suffering and chaos of the mid-4th century BC, when Judah joined in the Phoenician rebellion, harshly put down by Artaxerxes III and his general Bagoas. So you would have some really key events in the geographical region related to these historical accounts, but you have none of those. And so, since they're not even mentioned, then you got to wonder, maybe this happened, maybe this history was written before those events happened. Maybe you could think back to the 1700s. And if there's no mention of anything related like the establishment of the United States of America, or the Revolutionary War, or that there even is such a thing, and you're writing about something that happened on a North American continent, and the historical document doesn't even seem to be aware, then you might be really looking at something prior to those historical events. So that's how we're suggesting that these historical books seem to be completely unconcerned with these regime changes, unconcerned with these great events of history that would have been, front and center in their day. So maybe that was not their day. They would have to be earlier, which is exactly what the biblical text suggests. Anything about the time of the writing of these books? The date?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, obviously, Alexander the Great, that was a massive undertaking in that area. So I agree with you. You would think that you would hear some type of reference to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you have to have other reasons for denying the historicity of these biblical books. You'd have to have other fish to fry, other motives for wanting it to be so late in the 200s. You'd have to be intentionally resisting what would appear to be the, shall we say, straightforward and honest or
Yeah,
face
you're
value.
you're an academic atheist,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you have
yeah.
a strong bias.
Right. A bias against the biblical text.
Correct.
Well, let's move then to the purpose of the book of Ezra. The purpose of Ezra is to record the return of the nation from the Babylonian exile and their reestablishment in the land. That's pretty straightforward. And that's then what we should find in terms of key words and verses. Take a look at Ezra chapter 7, verse 10 as a suggested key verse. For Ezra prepared his heart to seek the law of the Lord and to do it, and to teach in Israel statutes and judgments. So notice this return then to the Torah, a return to the covenant relationship. It's to rightly be compared, if you will, to that sweet restoration that parents have with their children after discipline. I mean, Israel was taken to a divine timeout, if you will, in the Babylonian captivity. And with their timeout, with their time of discipline outside the land. Now they are invited to have a remnant return and to rebuild the temple. And yet, even though many have stayed in exile or stayed in the galut, in the diaspora, there is this return, if you will, to the text of Scripture, to the question of what does it mean to obey God now? Ezra.
It blows me away that God worked through King Cyrus to
Mhm.
allow the remnant to go back to Judah, and not only to go back, but to actually take all the gold and the silver and the vessels back with them that they had in their treasury, and then additionally gave them resources so that they can do this. I mean, you would just think a self-interested king would have no motive or incentive to do that on his own. Like, to me, that just screams divine intervention.
It really does. And if I could turn our attention to some of the geography there, I'm going to look intentionally at some maps. I think I can find here. Maybe. Yeah, are you able to see this map of the Persian
Yes.
Empire at the time of Ezra?
Yes.
Uh, this is from the ESV Study Bible, and I appreciate how it's showing in the green here the extent of the Persian Empire at the time of Ezra. And then some territories later related to the Hellenic League, and then the return of the Judean exiles under Ezra's leadership. So you're seeing that red line here. I'll trace it with my cursor here. That kind of like the same path from close to Ur of the Chaldees here, and then where Abram would have went long ago, go west and into the promised land. Now the Judahites are allowed to return and to go back to their homeland, the land promised to the patriarchs, to the land, as the map here suggests, the land beyond the river, meaning beyond the Euphrates River, to go back to Babylon, to the land of Canaan, to the land of promise. Whereas in the exile, they went beyond the Jordan River. They went way over back into Babylonia for the exile. Now, when we think about this new empire that comes on the scene, and I think I've told you this before, that the ancient empires that ruled, and for that matter, we can switch scenes and go back to this chart. You can see our chart of the ancient Near Eastern history, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So the major empires of Mesopotamia were Assyria, a little tiny Babylonia, and then Persia before you get to the Greeks and Alexander the Great. So if you want to memorize these in order, just memorize your ABPs: Assyria, Babylonia, and Persia. The ABPs. When you think of the one that you might know the most about, almost close your eyes and don't even look at how their power would be illustrated by these graphics in terms of which one was the largest, which one was the most powerful. If you close your eyes and just think about the emphasis in the biblical text, which one would you know most about? Which one would you have heard the most about?
Babylonians.
Exactly. And it's because they do the deed of destroying the temple and taking the Jews captive into Babylon. I mean, oh, this is the tragedy that the biblical text commemorates. And so it's no accident that this word Babylon is the most reported on of any of these earthly kingdoms. But perhaps that's a reminder that the same is true of the list of Israel's kings and the lists of many of the kings of the foreign lands that dealt with the Israelites. The kings that get the most press are not getting the most press because they were the richest, or they were the most powerful, or they were the most vast in terms of their empires. No, they are recorded in the biblical text really related to what God wants to have recorded and what was important in his economy, not the economy, not the global economy. So, you know most from the biblical text from Babylonia, but Assyria was a far more vast empire. And when you go to the museums of the world, there is so much to be appreciated from Assyria, whether it's these huge statues of conglomerate beasts that look like they have the wings of an eagle and the body of a bull or a huge horse or something like, and the head of a man with a beard. All these Assyrian wall reliefs and hunting scenes, and yeah, Assyria is huge in world history. And you hear a little bit about it because they are the ones that took out Samaria and the northern kingdom. But you really hear more about Babylonia. And yet, look at that shape and how small Babylonia is. And then look how huge, even in comparison to Assyria and Babylonia, the Persian Empire is. So much happens because of Cyrus's decree to the Jewish people to go back and rebuild Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. Now we have to ask the question, from a human standpoint, why would Cyrus want to do this? And for this, I want to go back to our map. Can you see the map again of the Persian Empire at the time of Ezra?
Yes.
Part of what we have to realize is that just like our timeline that I was just showing would illustrate, we focused on the upper part of that timeline dealing with Mesopotamia. But for 3,000 years, at the bottom of that timeline, Egypt was a continual kingdom. Yes, by this point, much of it is overrun by the Persians, and Egypt is now dominated by the Persians. Cyrus is in control of what had been the Babylonian Empire and what had been the Assyrian Empire, and he is expanding vastly. You can see all the way to India in the east, and through Greece in the west, and through much of North Africa, and certainly all the Nile Delta and Egypt. So if he's in control of all this, and somewhat suddenly so, you have to think about his own foreign policy and how is he going to control his kingdom. If Nebuchadnezzar was the first to exile his foes and to take the best and the brightest and train them in the ways of the Chaldeans and teach them about the Babylonian culture and to get the enemy close and to learn everything you can from them and to make advisors out of people like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Well, we shouldn't simply boil this down to thinking, wow, Nebuchadnezzar, what a big meanie. He exiled them when he destroyed the temple. And what a nice guy, this Cyrus, king of Persia. He's now going to let the Jews go back. Before we just oversimplify things and suggest that Nebuchadnezzar is the big meanie and Cyrus is the nice guy who let them return. Let's think about foreign policy and the fact that none of these pagan rulers are going to do something just to be a blessing. Well, the question is, what do they hope to get out of this? For Cyrus, now the king of Persia, his biggest threat related to the region that had been Israel was Egypt. Egypt that had been a continual culture for 3,000 years. What if the Egyptians begin to rebel and to push northeast? Well, where would they go but to the land between? They would go to the land that had been Israel. They would expand and push back against the Persian rule. And wow, this could ruin everything. Look how all of North Africa would suddenly be out of control of the Persians. And so when Cyrus the Great gives his decree that the Jews can go back, he's certainly doing something to create an alliance and to promote fidelity and trust and allegiance, and to give them reasons to fight for his side against the Egyptians. Again, he's going to motivate them, and you could see the sort of psychological war strategy going on here. Here's a whole bunch of money. Go and build yourself a temple in the homeland of your forefathers and make it real nice. Parentheses, so you'll really want to defend it. See? And plus, we're in favor of you believing your God gave you that land. So go back to your homeland and you settle there, and you have my authority to take back Jerusalem and live in Judea. And there you go. Because if the Egyptians are going to push back against Persian rule, they're going to have to go through this land in Judea. And now the Jews, they will fight tooth and nail to defend their temple in Jerusalem, and that'll give me, the king of Persia, time to amass my other armies and get them down there in the southwestern portion of my kingdom to stop the Egyptians from going any further.
Like a buffer zone.
Exactly. Have you ever heard of something like that?
I have
Yeah,
read that.
so
It's
the
like
Baltic states.
yeah, he just created, the Jews were kind of his human shield.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. That's like the way it works. It's pretty simple. So maybe reflect on that for a few minutes and think about how this would work.
Well, ultimately, it doesn't work.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. There we go. I mean, during Cyrus's day, he does seem to place them just in the right spot. I mean, these aren't dummies. They don't get to be the head of an entire region for no reason. So again, here's another map, by the way, I put on the screen. Did you see it?
Yeah. So
yes.
I don't remember is the remnant that returns, are they paying tax back to Cyrus?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. You pay your taxes, you can go home, and you, just like all the others under my rule, you know your place.
Yeah, and I don't remember if it was Ezra or Nehemiah, but their neighbors were unhappy that they were rebuilding the temple, right? And they were going back to the king and they were saying, "Don't trust these guys. You think that they're going to be good neighbors and pay their tax. They have a history of rebelling."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's it. Hey, would one of you read this paragraph describing Judea under Persian rule? And notice the dates, because it's right up until Alexander the Great. So this is Persian rule.
Under Persian rule, the lands of Israel, now called Samaria, and Judah, now called Judea, were minor provinces within the satrapy called Beyond the River. It appears that Edomites encroached upon Judea's southern border after the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians, and this territory was now called Idumea. These regional boundaries remained more or less the same throughout the Persian period. Returning Judeans settled mostly in the province of Judea, but a few settled in the plain of Ono and Idumea as well.
Mm-hmm.
Idumea.
Idumea. Mm-hmm.
Idumea.
Mm-hmm. So the plain of Ono, this would be over here near Joppa. And Idumea, notice how it's similar to the word Edom, but Edom is southeast of the Dead Sea. And they went south of the Dead Sea and west and north all the way to the border of Judea. Now let's look at another map associated with Ezra from the ESV Study Bible. Here is just Jerusalem itself at the time of Zerubbabel. So maybe read this paragraph for us.
I can read it.
Mm-hmm.
Among the first tasks undertaken, the exiles' return was the rebuilding of the altar and the temple. Almost immediately, the altar was set up, and regular burnt offerings were resumed. About a year later, the foundations of the temple were laid, but opposition from the local governors halted the completion of the temple for over 20 years. Finally, in 515 BC, during the reign of Darius, the temple was completed. The city walls, however, would not be rebuilt until 70 years later under the leadership of Nehemiah.
Right. So you think of what was happening during this time of the return, recorded by Ezra. Zerubbabel, he's a major figure in this period. Ezra is really preparing for a lot of immediate restoration of the sacrificial system. It's like this first sentence suggests that among the first tasks undertaken upon the exiles' return was the rebuilding of the altar and the temple. So it's not like they even had a protected city yet. They went right for the, as we'll see in the text of Ezra, when they discover a copy of the Torah and they're reading about these festivals and these appointed times that God had established. It's like they wanted to do all of them at once. It's almost like if you could imagine some American being captured and held hostage in a foreign land, and we're talking 70 years. Most of the original people who would have ever left, you don't hear them personally coming back. It would be their descendants who heard about all these festivals and only celebrated them in exile and observed them in exile. But now they are in Jerusalem and they have an altar that they're setting up. And now it's almost like, and again, imagine an American being held hostage for decades away from their homeland. And it's like, I want to celebrate everything at once. I want apple pie and I want Thanksgiving turkey and I want a Christmas ham and I want to, like, every day of the week, you want another American holiday, because, what can we give you to help you uh, fulfill all your wishes while you were gone? And that's what we begin to see with the zeal of people when they returned. They didn't even rebuild the city yet. They didn't even worry about security yet. They didn't build the walls yet. They just rebuilt the altar so that they could immediately begin worshiping the Lord. And it wouldn't be till Nehemiah's time, about 70 years later, that they begin building the walls. So it's been said that Ezra builds up the people, Nehemiah builds up the walls. Have you heard that?
I haven't, but that aligns very well with the books.
So let's go back to our handout then, closing these map windows. And here we go. Can you see our handout on Ezra?
Yes.
Yes.
So the theme. Ezra's theme is the restoration of Israel's spiritual worship after returning from the Babylonian captivity by building the second temple. And just to put this in context, when I use this chart on ancient Near Eastern history, one of the things I have as a sort of a subset line of Israel's history is sacred space. Where are the people worshiping the Lord? Well, first at the tabernacle under the time of Moses, Joshua, even Samuel, David, the tabernacle. But eventually Solomon builds the temple. It's that temple that the Babylonians defile, destroy. And then under Ezra and Nehemiah, you have the building of the second temple. That second temple gets beautified by Herod the Great. And so some refer to this same temple, but in a different time period, as Herod's temple. He frankly was ashamed of how simple it looked compared to the great Roman temples of the day. And so he wanted to beautify the second temple. But it's this beautified version of the second temple that gets destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. You see the chart there?
Yeah.
Yes.
So we would also note that this rise of the Roman Empire and the time of Herod the Great and his beautification process, by the way, it lasted well after his death. Herod the Great dies in 444 BC, or 444 before Christ. He dies on April the 4th in 4 BC, which lets you know that the BC date is a little off concerning the birth of Jesus. But the Bible's not off. It's just that the dating system of the calendar is off. Now, Herod sought to beautify the temple, but there were different Herodian kings in his line, and in the process of beautifying the temple continues until about 10 years before it's destroyed. And so it was beautified already in the days of Jesus and continuously being upgraded, the shiputzim, as we would call them in Hebrew, the renovations. They continued the continual upgrading and beautifying of the temple. And you can go to Jerusalem today and see some of the stones, the large, massive stones that were used in the time of Herod the Great. And he liked to put special etched borders around his stones, so almost like a frame around each large stone, so that when you're in Jerusalem and you look at different layers of stone building, you can say, oh, that's from the Herodian period. Oh, that's from the Herodian period. Look at the framing around the outside of that stone. Well, all of this to put us in the historical context again of Ezra and Nehemiah and ultimately Esther. Ezra's theme then is the restoration of Israel's spiritual worship after returning from the Babylonian captivity by building the Second Temple. I guess the last thing I want to say about Second Temple is that this also gives us a time period for the study of the Jewish people and Jewish literature that was exploding, if you will, that was really a high point. I mean, think about this. In the Old Testament, you never hear the word synagogue. You never hear the word rabbi. And many other things. Pharisee, Sadducee, Essenes. These are not, in other words, Judaism is something that develops in the exile and beyond, and has its defining moments somewhat in response to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and the messianic claims of Jesus and the apostles. Second Temple Judaism then takes shape in response to key events of history that affect the Jewish people. And for that reason, some have called the time period and the literature produced in that time period, they referred to this as Second Temple Judaism. And going back to our chart, we just need to see when the Second Temple was. We're talking about from the return of Ezra and Nehemiah to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, which would include the entirety of the New Testament era, or at least the life of Jesus and the immediate following. So Second Temple Judaism, the Second Temple period. All right.
Which
yeah,
that would include the intertestamental period.
right. But now
Right.
think about this for a moment. Jewish people don't want to call it the intertestamental period, right? Because you'd have to believe in the New Testament.
Right.
Just like we don't date things pre and post Muhammad. The Jewish community is not going to refer to the intertestamental period. But wouldn't you know, it's almost, it's pretty close. I mean, somewhere in here, we have the last prophet, Malachi, and and John the Baptist coming on the scene some 400 years later. So they roughly correspond, but not fully. Second Temple period is larger than the intertestamental period, but they overlap.
So on the timing of Ezra and his writing and the temple, I was reviewing some notes earlier today on this, and Ezra, I mean, Zerubbabel was really the one in charge of getting the temple built, wasn't it? Ezra wasn't around Jerusalem at that time, correct?
I think that's correct. And a friend of mine liked to emphasize how we really should give Zerubbabel so much more credit. And by the way, Zerubbabel, what does his name mean?
Builder
Zerah.
of the temple.
Well,
No.
that's maybe what he should be famous for, but Zerah means seed, like as in the Abrahamic covenant, land, seed, and blessing. Eretz, Zerah, and bracha, land, seed, and blessing. Zerah. But Zerubbabel, now this is a little easier. What does Babel mean? But Babylonia. He is the seed of Babylon, meaning he was born in the exile, but now he's returned. Zerubbabel. Now, this is what a colleague of mine liked to say. Zerubbabel. This is how the people, when they returned, the exiles returned to Judah, and there's no temple, they began to say, Zerubbabel, we're in trouble. The temple lies in rubbable. Get over here on the doubleable. So there he is. There he is. Zerubbabel. Yeah. And while he doesn't have a book named after him, he really is a major figure in rebuilding the second temple. And if we're going to do justice to the biblical text, we have to emphasize the role of Zerubbabel and his leadership. So that's why I call Roman numeral 1 of the outline of the book of Ezra Zerubbabel's leadership.
But there was also like a 20-year gap in there where like they started work and then they got some pushback and they stopped working for 20 years.
Yeah.
And I think it was one of the prophets that basically, I can't remember which one, but basically says, hey guys, it's time to get back to work.
Yeah. Zechariah.
Okay.
Yeah. Zechariah encourages that, and Haggai.
Okay. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So true. Well, let's take a quick look then at the outline. And again, the outline is not inspired. It's just intended to be of help to organize the thoughts, and your textbook will offer another outline. And I'm sure in the various documents that you can find on Canvas, we'll have other outlines of the book. But I'm going for something simple here, where we divide the book between Zerubbabel's leadership, chapters 1 through 6, and Ezra's leadership, chapters 7 through 10. I'm sure that text can be broken up in different ways, but it's pretty simple and straightforward. You've got Zerubbabel as the key leader, and you've got Ezra as the key leader. And during or covered in chapters 1 and 2, you have the return of the exiles. I mentioned the proclamation of Cyrus, the preparation of the Jews, the presentation of the vessels, and the population of the travelers. And then restoration of Jerusalem, chapters 3 through 6, with the restoration of worship, of the foundation, of the restoration, and the interruption of the restoration. So there would be your point about some interruption of all of this. And then there's the resumption of the restoration process in chapters 5 and 6, with the initiative of the leaders, inquiry of Darius, investigation of, and again, you can pronounce the same Darius, instructions of Darius, the completion of the temple, the dedication of the temple, and the celebration of the Passover. So there we are under the leadership of Zerubbabel, chapters 1 through 6. And then Ezra's leadership, chapters 7 through 10, you have the return of Ezra, the description of his journey, the decree of Artaxerxes, whose name, of course, is spelled various ways, including chopping off the first 4 letters and just calling him Xerxes, and the details of the journey, the census of the travelers, the selection of the ministers, the supplication for safety, the separation of the wealth. Maybe I got too much of an alliteration kick here, but the safety of the trip. And this brings you then to the delivery of his charges in chapter 8, verses 33 to 36. You now have the reforms that take place under Ezra. Well, this is pretty intense. You'll remember how strict he was because of Israel's continued engagement in the same sorts of behaviors that got them in trouble in the first place. He wanted to not only clean up the town, he wanted to get right with God. He wanted people to stop their false ways. And so here we go, chapter 9. The problem, pain, prayer of Ezra, and the petition of Shechaniah, the proclamation for assembly, the preaching of Ezra, the procedure for separation and separating, and the people with strange wives. Maybe we take a moment to remind ourselves. Did you happen to read this section recently in chapter 10?
Is that when they were intermarrying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he would have none of that,
and they repented, though.
Yes. So sometimes, just like a real strict football coach or something, he's going to whip the team into shape. Well, that's kind of how things began to work under Ezra. Let's look at some of these significant passages or issues. A major concern of Ezra in returning from exile was that of keeping the community pure from the syncretistic influence of the neighbors who surrounded it. So writes Edwin Yamauchi in his commentary on Ezra Nehemiah in the Expositor's Bible Commentary. By the way, Yamauchi went on well after this to write a beautiful, thick work on Persia in the Bible. And I should at least mention that to you in this context. So much of the a study of the history and culture and archaeology and influences of Persia in the biblical world. Yamauchi's name then is associated with so much that provides us with helpful understanding of this time period in biblical history. We can go on to say that thus Ezra's spiritual emphasis on cleansing the people from their foreign marriages is seen in chapters 9 and 10. Now, letter B, 7 official documents or lists are included in Ezra. You've got the decree of Cyrus, the accusation of Rehum and others against the Jews, the reply of Artaxerxes I, the report from Tetaniah, the memorandum of Cyrus's decree, Darius's reply to Tetaniah, the king's authorization to Ezra. All but the first of these lists were written in Aramaic, the official trade language of the day. So very much like parts of the book of Daniel are written in Aramaic rather than Hebrew, you also see that in Ezra. Because it's dealing with a population that wouldn't have been speaking Hebrew as their trade language. And so it's like putting it in the language that the people are speaking, which is again why the New Testament gets written in Greek, because of this Greco-Roman influence and Hellenization that deals with the imposition and appreciation of Greek language and culture. The New Testament is going to be written in a language that so many, the majority of the day can understand and appreciate. And thus, again, parts of Ezra are written in Aramaic, especially these official documents. Now, one last thing. This is by way of sort of a more simple or less academic note. It's from the Serendipity Study Bible, much more focused on application than interpretation. But You'll notice letter C here has a quote. Ezra is often seen as the father of Judaism because he promotes a way of life renewed by and centered on unswerving allegiance to the Torah. And I think that's fair. That's pretty helpful. But Judaism, actually, as we pointed out in the other timeline, is something that emerges during the Second Temple period and is something that solidifies with the destruction of the temple and in response to the person and work of Jesus as the Messiah. All right, so here is our introduction, if you will, to Ezra. And maybe we can take a little break at this point, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.